guys, are you okay for the recording to happen, or it just
It
records?
does not ask.
It does not ask. I
Just a
mean,
small
that's,
red
yeah.
button with a rec.
Yeah, okay. But at least you're aware that you're being recorded, so that's the case. Right. Well, let me share my screen. Okay, everybody can see my screen. Yes?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the beta version of a workshop series that I'm working on, and you guys are the beta tester guinea pigs. It should last about an hour for the formal part, and then I have an extra half hour given for any question and answers if we run over. The workshops, I have 6 of them lined up here. So today's one is we're looking at simple no-code agents, very simple, just to get a basic understanding of what I'm talking about and how they work. And then next week, we'll have a workshop where we'll be talking about adding memory and knowledge so that the AI keeps track of what's happening as it progresses, and then also uses a knowledge base so we can add more stuff to it. And then the next one is on business process automation and using AI with standard operating procedures and how we build. um, the more the quality of your business processes is improved before you bring in AI, the better the AI is able to do what you want it to do. And then we'll be looking at data analysis and structuring data for the maximum effect with AI. And then the whole knowledge management and my particular set of tricks for managing knowledge to use as a knowledge base with AI, but without having to go out to external databases, just being able to store your knowledge inside whatever no code tool you're using. And then finally, the last one is looking at superhuman AI agents. Superhuman consumed Coda and all of the Coda technology, and also the superhuman email system. And then Grammarly is the main company, and they've pulled all of that together to produce this new technology for AI agents. And I have a workshop coming up about that. So today's workshop, simple AI agents in no code. I'm going to demonstrate some simple agents, and then I'm going to present some of the techniques that are running behind that, and then we'll go through a build of it step by step, and then we'll finish off with questions and answers. The techniques that I'm using here will work on almost any no-code environment. I've already done them with Airtable, which I always explain to people is a bit like building things with Meccano. I've done it with Notion, which is way easier because it's like building things with Lego. But my favorite tool, and the one I'm going to use today, is Coda, because it's Lego Technic with all of the cogwheels and electric motors and doodads and so on. But any no code platform that has tables that can be connected in relationships, has formulas and automations, and if it has AI columns and formulas in it as well, and is able to store pages and access those pages as data. So even Excel and Google Sheets can be used with this technique. Um, so let's dive straight in and see an example of some agents. And I've used this, and apologies to some of you if you've seen this before. I've been using this for a while as the simplest set of agents that I've built in the real world as a place to start. I call it the broker's agents. It's for a company that is an insurance broker to the high and mighty multi-millions. All of their clients are millionaires and billionaires, so they're used to their clients not wanting to fill out screens and forms, but simply sending them messages saying, I've just bought a Ferrari, I've just bought a Lamborghini, I want to insure it, or I've just scratched the paint on my jet ski, it's going to cost 1,000, put in a claim, and so on. So here's a classic example of what they get. Messages that are either coming in from email or are coming in through a messaging system like WhatsApp. And in here, there's a whole mixture of instructions that have to be followed, and they're all written in different languages, right? And so, what we're going to do in the past, they would have to send each of these to a different human agent who understood that language. And then that human agent would have to translate those into transactions that could be put into their system. So what we're going to do is run agents. We have two agents. The first one is a translator agent, and the second one is what we call the dispatcher agent. The first one will figure out what's in the message and then extract all of the instructions that are in it and then send each of those instructions to the dispatcher, and the dispatcher will figure out what to do with it. In the production environment, there are different dispatchers for different types of products, but for this very simple example, I'm just going to have one dispatcher that's going to try and do everything. So when I hit the start button, it's going to start running. So it has brought in each of the messages and is now going through the process of figuring out what language are they in, translating them into English, parsing that into a set of instructions, and then the output is a list. This is not a single piece of text, but actually a structured list with each of the instructions on it. And as you see, it's going through boom, 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 one AI thing at a time. And it has sent each of those instructions to the dispatcher here as the input. And the dispatcher is now using AI to figure out, is there a policy being referred to? Is there an amount in there? Is there a date? And it is generating a transaction in a format that's sent off to a mainframe to execute this transaction. And this is just a very, very simple, easily replicated set of agents. But once a message comes in, it runs automatically. It is autonomous. There is no chatbot with somebody typing something into a window and waiting for a response. This is a set of agents. Agents run autonomously in the background, asynchronously. They are action oriented. This one is actually able to create new policies and send them off to the insurance system to create these policies for these amounts. And another thing that agents have to have is they're auditable. Each agent leaves a track behind it of what I was asked to do, what I did, and what the result was, so that if something does go wrong or an error is generated, we have an auditable trail left behind. So I'm going to pause for a moment, stop sharing there, and just see if we have any questions. If not, I'll just press ahead, but I just don't like to leave people behind in the dust. So if anybody's going, oh, I don't know what's happening, is this AI? Is it a formula? You know, it's right. Okay, well then, let me go and share a different screen then and talk a little bit about what we are doing and what we're going to be doing as the workshop continues in the future. My motivation for putting together these workshops is actually based on my own experience over the last 3 years. Until 3 years ago, when GPT came out, I was very happily running a small consulting business that automated things using no code. I started with Excel, and then I discovered Notion and went bonkers on Notion. And then I started using Coda. And so I've been taking businesses who want to automate their processes and automating them with those tools. And then 3 years ago, this newfangled form of AI appeared, right? Using large language models. And I very quickly started to see it as a bit of a tsunami wave that was coming down straight at us, right? And I have to say, my initial reaction was not good. I could see both myself and a lot of the people that I worked with getting caught by this wave, this tsunami of AI that started 3 years ago, right? So large language models started off very, very crude, but they started to become much more effective. But the thing I didn't like about them was they were focused on language. And most of my business and all my automations were focused on formulas and logic. So these LLMs were very bad at logic and computing, right? Simple things like saying, if this, then that, else the other, it would be okay for one level. But if the result of the then was another if statement, so if I said, if the customer account is this type, that type, or the other type, then if the transaction type is this type of transaction or that type of transaction, then if the amount is above this threshold, then do X, Y, and Z. Otherwise, A, B, and C, and so on. Very quickly got lost and wasn't able to do that. And so it struck me as being very hard to use, and I couldn't figure out how to use it in business. Then, of course, there was the hallucinations, which I don't think of as hallucinations, they're errors. And when you have an LLM that generates hallucinations 2%, 3%, sometimes as much as 8% of the time, I mean, that's crazy. In the businesses that I'm working at, which are regulated industries, that's not called hallucinations. That's called criminal neglect or negligence, and going to land you in serious trouble. And then the other thing was that I was useless at prompting. I just couldn't get it, right? It was called prompt engineering, but there was nothing engineering about it as far as I was concerned. The engineering is precise, it's deterministic, and this prompting wasn't. And then I started to notice, and particularly among my clients, that there was a bunch of bozos, right? In other words, non-techies, who were brilliant at prompting. And I started to look at the prompts they were using, because my clients were getting in touch with me regularly saying, well, how can we manage this? And what are we going to do? And I took a look at some of these prompts. Oh, I hated them. They were full of very verbose, twisted language, because every time they ran the prompt, it would do something unexpected. They would add an extra clause to say, now put the format in this, don't do this, don't do that, only put this in, and so on. And by the time they were finished, it read more like a legal document, a contract. And sure enough, it was legal people who seemed to be getting the most success with these prompts. And so I started to get concerned that this whole LLM and these AIs weren't going to be much use for business. And then some of my friends started to have problems. So I'm going to add another few drowning people in here, if I may, just to. So friends of mine who were doing translations and transcripts were suddenly losing business. They were all on the websites Upwork and Fiverr and so on. The next people who started losing business were people who did sales and marketing, writing for copywriting for them. And then suddenly my friends who were also building websites were starting to lose business. Their business was drying up because about 90% of what they did was actually the language and the salesmanship of the websites they were building, and not a lot of it was to do with HTML. Then vibe coding started to come along, and people who were making a living doing all kinds of coding were starting to see not so much that their business was drying up, so much as the value being placed on it by the market was dropping. So this AI tsunami was already starting to sweep away the jobs and careers of people. And I started to get genuinely worried. I only had a small business, and I did more than just a little bit here and there with Coda and Notion. But at the same time, it was started to become clear to my clients and me that this AI tsunami was going to have a big impact on knowledge workers in general. And every time I tried to use AI in a business context, I couldn't figure out, and my clients were the same. Where do we use it? I mean, chatbots are all well and good, but they're not going to help automate our business. And then finally, I started to crack the code. I went to, at the time, about 2.5 years ago, the best place to go to build AI stuff was LangChain. And I started to see how if you had your SOPs well defined, and then you were using no code or any kind of IT technology to build automations, then this intersection in between was where you could bring in AI. But not just any AI, it had to be AI agents. So it wasn't chatbots. You weren't having people typing into text box. It wasn't even the AI that listens to people on the phone and so on. This was where we have standard operating procedures automated in no code, and we can insert some AI into the middle of it. And this is where the ROI proved to be. And once I started doing this for my clients, we started to have a huge amount of success. And so instead of feeling that I was stuck under the wave, I know this is really crude, but you know, it's how I see it.
It serves a
This
purpose.
is a way to ride the wave, to actually survive and thrive after the tsunami comes. And then I started using this with my clients and they loved it. And I started teaching them to do it themselves and they loved it. And so it suddenly occurred to me, because more and more of my friends were coming to me saying, "Oh, AI, it's putting us out." I mean, even people who were in physical business of shipping things. I have a friend who has a store that ships all across Europe crafting material, needlework stuff. And their business has been hit by these Chinese suppliers, Temu and people like that. And it's not because they're cheaper so much as they're marketing much more intelligently. So all their customers who have any sort of crafting on their social media are getting picked up by the AI for these people, and they're getting amazing offers that are so precisely matched to the particular type of origami paper that they buy that they end up going and buying it from them and not coming to their usual regular supplier. So I developed a mechanism for getting these standard operating procedures and no code automations and figuring out how to put AI in the middle of it as an agent. And so now I'm going to do a quick sort of overview of how we build it inside a no-code tool. So in every no-code tool, we are talking about cells in a row, right? So each agent is going to be built as a series of cells in a row. So we have a row either in your spreadsheet or in one of your database tables, and we're going to call the first cell your input. And the last cell is going to be the output. And so every time let's fill that in. Every time the agent runs, we're going to have a series of steps that take us from some kind of an input to some kind of an output. So to start the agent, we create a row in our no code and we stick in the input. And when the agent is finished, we will have an output at the end. So we break it down into a series of steps. So the first step is where we're going to have a prompt, and we're going to send that prompt to an AI. And we're going to use the standard AI that's available in the no-code tool we're using. So you use the standard Notion AI or the standard Airtable AI, or in the case of Coda, the one that they use, which is at the moment GPT 4 point something. So that prompt is going to go to the AI and it's going to come back with a response. The prompt is a blob of text, And the response is going to be a blob of text, because inside these business processes, we're not using the AI to generate images or videos or anything like that. It's all structured text. So how do we get this prompt? And this is where we start to get into a piece of the magic, because what I do is I have a formula. Whatever no-code tool I'm using, I write a formula. The formula has a piece of text that is the prompt, but it's also a formula that pulls in information from the input, combines it with text that I want to build the prompt with, and outputs that as the prompt. So I have a formula that generates the prompt. So now suddenly I'm in the business of being able to do clever things inside my no-code tool using the no-code knowledge and capabilities that I've had all along. I'm not really learning anything new. Now, any automation that you run in the world of no-code is also going to have database tables, right? So inside my automation, I've already got a set of tables, right? So I have my customer table, I have my product table, I have my table of orders, I have my table of delivery dockets, etc., all that kind of stuff. And so now my formula can, if needs be, pull in information from my tables, because I know how to write a formula in Coda or Notion or whatever that's pulling together text from different places in my database to build my big, long, complicated prompt that has information built into it with the customer details, the order details, the input that has come in from whatever triggered this prompt or whatever triggered this agent. And then it will send that off to the AI, and the AI will come back with a response. And having done that for the first step, I can now do the same thing for the second step, because an agent doesn't try to do everything all in one clever prompt, but is in fact taking the response, pulling data in from the database, and building a new prompt. And that new prompt will then also get sent off to the AI, and it will come back with a response. However, there's something else we're going to need to make an agent work within our business. Most AI agents are well trained in a very general way, but they don't know anything about our particular business, our particular procedures and processes, the vocabulary that we use, the terms and conditions that we use. So we're going to need to have what's known as a knowledge base. And a knowledge base is basically made up of documents. Some of them are big documents, some of them are small documents, right? And we're used to having lots of documents around in our business telling people how to do things, instruction manuals, checklists, procedures and policies, etc., etc. And now with our AI systems, we are able to pull in information from these documents and use them to help the process. So we can have a formula here that's not only building a prompt with information from our database, but it can pull in information from our knowledge base. So we can say these policies and procedures and that checklist, we're going to include them in the prompt. So now the prompt doesn't just contain data from our data tables, it contains documents as well. And we'll see in a minute how that can help make the whole process run much better. And then finally, we have the last formula, which is basically going to take the result of the last AI, maybe pull in some extra data, and then format that as the final output for the agent. So now the agent is finished. We've broken down what the agent does into a series of steps where we build a prompt, goes to the AI, we get a response, build another prompt based on what's inside that response, parsing it, pulling out the information, build another prompt, sending it to the AI, comes back, and finally we get our output. When we get the output, we're going to trigger an automation. And each of the tools that we use has a slightly different way of doing automations, but basically automations are able to do something more than we can normally do with formulas, because these automations, when they're triggered, have the ability to write data back to the database. So they can say, I now have an update to make to the order. I have now been able to generate new delivery, and I can update the stock control for this product. So these automations can add rows and modify rows and delete rows inside our tables. The other thing that the AI, that the automation can do, is it can go and trigger another agent. So if this is agent 1, it can look at the output and say, oh, okay, this now needs to go to some other agent, say agent 2, or no, this is a different thing, it needs to go to agent 3, and so on. So each of these agents, when it's finished, can simply trigger a new agent. It creates a new row for that agent and puts the data that it needs to start with into the input column. And that, in a squiggly, messy diagram, is the secret sauce that allowed me to start building AI agents using all these different no-code tools. And so I'm going to just pause there for a moment and see, has everybody been able to follow me? Are there any questions? Is it a pile of junk, or is it something that you'll find useful?
I find
thought it
it
was really
good
neat.
to be stolen, the way of explaining while just using squiggly lines.
Say again?
I just like the way of using squiggly lines to prove a point. It doesn't need to make sense for people just seeing the output. It does
Yes,
make
yeah,
sense to
yeah.
us, and it's easy to follow.
Okay, well, I'm famous for producing these. If there isn't a whiteboard in the room, I'll go to the window with my whiteboard pen, and I'll do diagrams on the window. Yeah. Sorry, Doug, we interrupted you.
No, I thought it's just a whole really neat concept. My question was from much earlier when I couldn't get the mic to turn on, which that I'm not used to school yet. When you were running the translation insurance program, were you
Yep.
running each box, or was it going from box to box by itself? Because it seemed to sort of pause at each box and run it and then go to the next box.
Okay, so I'm deliberately doing that. So let me just briefly go back and do that again. And this time so I'm going to share a different screen.
I have to also say your method of the prompts, knowing what to say and getting the information and moving on, warms my lawyer's heart, because that means you can control the precision of the
Yes,
information And people don't
Yes.
have sort of an extraneous they wandering around, and the AI doesn't know who that is, and off it goes on its own insane way.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happens is when I hit the start button, it will first of all take the first message and it'll put it in here. So it'll create a new AI translator agent, in other words, a new row, and it'll give it the message as the input.
Oh, okay.
If I let it default, Coda will try and run as many AIs at the same time, and it will swamp the server. And they have an algorithm for load management that will actually throttle the process. So if you generate too many requests to their AI backend, it'll slow you down simply because they're trying to control. So it runs faster, counterintuitively, I know, but it runs faster if I get it to do each one at a time, right? So here are the messages, and it's doing one, then the next, then the next, but it's doing that automatically. In Notion and in Airtable, it's the same thing. It runs one of them at a time. And as you see, it goes fairly quickly. If I don't make it run one at a time, it actually tries to slow down. You'll see all the sparklies all light up at the same time, and then it just goes away for a while. Whereas here, I'm getting it to happen fairly quickly, one after another.
Great.
So does that answer your question, Doug?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. So now I'm going to go in and take a look at how we actually build it so that you can go on your merry way now and build this yourself anytime you want. Next week, we'll start to add some extra fancy bits to it so that we'll be using knowledge bases and other calculations and using a much more sophisticated example. Translation is not very impressive because everybody thinks that AI is great at translating. Turns out it's not, but and we'll cover that in a moment. Okay, so first of all, I want to examine the start button so that we can see what the start button does, right? Just to get things started, I do a reset. I delete the AI translator table and I delete the AI dispatcher table just to make sure that because I'm running this over and over again, it's just putting everything back to zero. And then it says, go to the message queue, and for every message that's in there, do an add row to the AI translator. This is how you create an agent. You say add row, and you give it an input. So I say add row input is the current value, and the current value is what's in the message queue, right? So here's the message, and I think some of you will be able to read that because some of you will know Spanish. And when it has done that, it has now filled up the message. It has filled up the AI translator table with the messages that are in the backlog. And then it says, go to the AI translator and hit the execute automation. And when it's done that, go to the dispatcher and hit the execute automation. And we'll have a look at what they are in a moment. Now, quick pause. Anybody, any questions here, or do you understand what this start button is doing? Okay, so, sorry, did somebody say something? So now I'm going to take a look at the AI. I'm not using any packs. I'm not using any APIs. I'm not using anything outside the system like N8M or Zapier. I'm just using ordinary Coda AI. And so I have an AI column, and it's a custom prompt because you could choose to do summarize and a few other things, but I always do a custom prompt. Notice I have the refresh turned off. That's important because if you leave that on, then it'll start trying to do things in its own sequence, and that doesn't suit us. I want to run things one at a time. I haven't specified the length, the tone, the type, and I haven't written one of your big hairy prompts that says you are an expert in modern European languages, blah, 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 blah. It just says, what language is the message below written in? And the only fancy thing I've put in is please respond with a single English word, because sometimes it comes back with more than that. And I'm referring to the input, which is this column here. So it says, take that column and stuff it into the bottom part of the prompt. And the top part of the prompt says, what language is it? And when it runs, it comes back and says that it's Italian. Now, you might think I don't need to know the language to do the translate, but I do need to know the language later because we have a problem with standard translation. And I'll come back to that later. When it has figured out what language it is, it then goes to the next column and it says, translate the message below from whatever the language is into English verbatim. Respond with plain, unformatted text with no extra words or symbols. Yeah, I have to say that because sometimes it comes up with bullets, sometimes it puts it into a quotation block and all kinds of things. So I'm saying, look, just give me unformatted text because you kind of have to play with it. And here's the message that you have to translate, right? So I say message below, boom, here's the message. Nice, short, simple, straightforward, honest to God prompt with none of your fancy lula stuff in it, right? Again, let everything automate, but make sure that the refresh is turned off. So this will only happen when I want it to happen. In the other tools like Notion and Airtable, you don't have this option and it's fine. It doesn't seem to want to choke things or, well, you've no control over it, so there's nothing you can do. So it has then translated all of this into this verbatim, right? And we can send it off to do it again just to show that's all it's doing. Now I want to do another piece of AI, which is to say the message below contains several instructions from a client to their insurance broker. AIs understand when you put something in capitals, it's blooming important and it gives it importance. And I want, so this is my way of saying, listen, we're dealing with insurance brokers here, so put on your smarty pants and deal with it. Please list each of the instructions as a separate paragraph. Respond with plain unformatted text. Here's the translation. And it splits it up nicely, right? So if I take this and get rid of the text and then say, please go and do it again, it will go off and do it again, right? And it comes back with the instructions. The output is just a formula. I had asked for the instructions to be a separate paragraph. So if I split it using line break, I will get a list of instructions, not a single blob of text. And I need that list of instructions because what happens next is I'm going to send this off to the next agent. And to see how that works, we're going to look at the automation at the end, right? So in Coda, we say run actions if you have more than one action. And so I'm going to refresh assistant is the function that will refresh your AI assistants. And I list them one after another because I want first to know the language. Then I want to do the translation. And then I want you to do the instructions. And so that's where you're seeing it go boom, 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 one after another. Plus, it won't go on to the next action until all of these are finished. So I'm minimizing the opportunity for parallel processing to happen because Coda is very keen to try and get as much done all at once. Right? I'm a believer in Einstein's theory where he said time was nature's way of stopping everything from trying to happen all at once. And this is what I'm doing here. I'm saying, do this, then this, then this. Now we're going to take the output, which is a list of instructions. And for each one of them, it puts it into current value. I'm going to go to the AI dispatcher agent. I'm going to do an add row, which is how you create a new instance of the agent. And I'm going to set the input equal to the current value, which is each of the instructions that's in the output. So this is a for each loop that runs through boom, 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 and puts all of the transactions that have been detected into the next agent. And the next agent, which is the dispatcher, has an input field that is not a formula. It's a piece of text. It has been filled in by the action above. And now we have some new AIs, right? I'm saying I have a series of transaction types: new policy, policy change, cancel policy, new claim. In the production version of this, there's about 20 different transaction types it has to be able to distinguish. And we put it all in a table with a description of what the transaction is about, so that the AI has a better chance of being able to sneakily figure out, hang on a second, you're not changing a policy, you're really canceling it, and things like that. But basically, I'm saying examine the transaction below and tell me which one. Respond with only one item. Yeah, sometimes it can get smart and try and say, well, it's a bit of a policy change and a new claim, and it has to be one. And here's the field, the input that I'm using to do that. And then there's a series of AIs where I'm saying, isn't it amazing how it managed to work even though I spelled find wrong? Please find any policy numbers that occur in the instructions below. Respond with just the policy number in plain unformatted text. But if there's no policy number, respond with the text none, right? Because if somebody's creating a new policy, they won't give a policy number, so it has the word none. And then there's one that pulls out the amount. There's one that pulls out the date. This one is worth watching because it solves one of the problems we have with dates. First of all, it's an example of where I've used the summarize with an additional instruction. So turns out in Coda, I can either say custom prompt and give it a prompt, or I can say summarize and then just give it my own prompt. It's basically the same. The automatic refresh is turned off. And I'm summarizing input, but with the extra instruction, extract any dates to be found in the text below, format each date as DD, MMM, YYYY, none of your American nonsense of getting the dates and the months mixed up, in plain unformatted text. If no dates are found, respond with the word NA. The amount of programming or formula bashing you normally have to do to get a randomly formatted string of characters that vaguely represents a date and turn it into DD, MMM, YYY is actually a bit of a challenge. But here we just put it into our prompt and it does it. So here, for example, somebody has written December 31, 2025. Here they've written June 5th. But there are places where they've written the date, have they? Actually, well, anyway, the point is that people can write the date in any old way they want. I'm always going to get it coming out as this format, right? And the final output is just a formula. And in this case, it's simply putting in these dividers between the different fields. We always want the type first, then the date, then the amount, then the policy, separated by a vertical bar. So we're doing some text formatting. The format function is something we're going to be using a lot to build our prompts and to parse our prompts and so on. And then we'll take a look at the code for the automation at the end, and then I'll stop and let you guys ask me questions. It's simply refreshing the assistants in the right order. First the type, then the policy, then the amount, and then the date. And that's it. Obviously, there would, in production, be other automations that would take this output column and send it off to the mainframe or do some further analysis on it. In the production environment, as I said, we would have multiple dispatchers for all the different transaction types. But in this case, we're keeping it simple enough for the purposes of this example. So I'm going to pause there for a moment and see if I've lost you all in the dust or have you kept up. Alex, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, I have a question. In your experience so far when working with the dates, because that's the big pain of any engineer, be it a data engineer or a whatever engineer.
Yes.
If it's ambiguous, I mean, if I write 4-4-2005, that could, or wait, 4-5.
Yep. It could. Yep.
That, it could be both, right?
So what we try to do in that case, and this isn't the production version, but in the production version, we have all kinds of extra things. One of the things we do is we include the client's details in the prompt. so that the AI is told this is a client from Barcelona sending an instruction to the Zurich insurance company to do with their maritime insurance, so that we're giving a context, and it will then interpret the date based on that locality. Right?
Yeah, and
You're right. It could be confusing if it didn't have that information. We're able to do some amazing things that you just couldn't write a formula for. We had a list of names, first names and surnames, and we had no idea which were male and which were female. But we knew which country they were in and which city they belonged to. Would you believe it that AI has no problem taking people's first names and surnames and making a guess at whether it's male, female, or likely to be either, right? And it just whizzed through it. I mean, where people talk about programming in English, yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there, very much so. And I say English because although AI can use other languages, English is still the best to use because it has the most experience with it. Okay. Did I answer your question, Alex?
yeah.
Okay. Anybody else got a question? Okay. So one last thing that I just want to briefly touch upon before I wrap up, and that is this example is not using any knowledge base, but using a knowledge base is going to make things run so much better. First of all, it reduces hallucination by grounding the AI and saying your answer must be coming from this document, or this document will advise you on how to process this request. And so the amount of opportunities for the AI to go off into Lululand and hallucinate its little head off is reduced. So here I have a typical document that we would include in our knowledge base. It is terminology used in the insurance industry, right? What is peril versus hazard? What is the co-insurance clause, and so on? And so it goes down through abbreviations that occur and so on. This is a standard document that any brokerage would have hanging around. And by simply taking it, curating it, I might edit it a bit and tidy it up and make it less confusing, and handing it over to the AI as part of my agent, I am able to improve the performance of my agents very significantly. If you look at my YouTube videos, you'll see I did one example where I took the software development kit for Coda and the formula definitions for all the Coda formulas and the definitions of all the API functions that Coda can do, and loaded all of those up into an agent. And it was able to generate code, generate formulas, and generate the necessary code to do the APIs, because I gave it that specialist information, which up until recently, none of the AIs could do because they didn't know enough about Coda. Now they do know a bit more and things are a little bit better. But this is the point, that you can take a knowledge base from your business and set it up so that your AI is able to manage to do a better job. So here is the Italian terminology used in the Italian insurance business and the English words or clauses that should be used. Because when we were translating people's instructions from Italian to English, without this detailed knowledge of how insurance terminology should be used, it was translating things a little bit peculiar, and the instructions were not terribly clear at the other end. So we have this idea that, oh, Google Translate and Gemini and all of these are great at translating. Not really. Not in an industry that has its own terminology, right? Another one I use this for is in civil engineering. I have a company that does large, expensive water pumps for pumping out mines and for pumping out quarries and building sites and so on. And there's a lot of technical terminology that customers use in their own language that then needs to be translated to English using a very precise understanding of what they're talking about. And a document like this will give them that information that they need to be able to do the translation correctly. And the great thing is that I can include these documents inside my prompt because Coda, Notion, and to a more limited extent, Airtable will allow me to take a document like this, stick it in a page or a canvas column in a table, and include it in the prompt. I can include a document up to about 250 kilobytes, so about a quarter of a megabyte, which will, I mean, this thing is only a few thousand bytes, right? And I can include these chunks of knowledge. And the reason I'm able to do this, if I switch back to our squiggly diagram for a moment, I have put the knowledge as pages inside my Coda document or my Notion document, or as special cells in a table inside Airtable. And my formulas are able to refer to them as easily as it can refer to any of the rows and columns in my database tables. So if I have figured out that I am dealing with a Spanish customer writing to me in Spanish, then my formula can say, please go to the Spanish page of translation, glossary, and assistance, and bring that into the prompt. So my prompt includes the necessary help the AI needs to handle Spanish. So I'm moving from something, fairly simple, and we're getting into something very sophisticated, right? And we've got a kind of a model where down at the bottom, we have data. And we're used to dealing with data as rows and columns in tables, right? So data is equal to tables. And then the other thing that we have that we can work with when we're building these automations is logic. And we handle logic and calculations using formulas. But then over a period of time, with the development of word processors and spreadsheets and no-code tools and so on, we started to be able to handle a much more sophisticated version of data called information. And that's in the form of richly formatted text, charts, diagrams, right? Documents, all that kind of stuff. And now with AI, we're moving up the level again. Because now we finally have a machine that's able to understand knowledge. And knowledge is also in the form of documents, but they're special documents. They're documents that give instructions, right? They're tutorials, they're how-to documents, they're checklists, they're training manuals that we give to people when they come on board that explain. They're policy and procedure documents that tell people and now systems how to do things. And so we've been moving up through the levels over the last few years, and we're now at the point where we're able to deal with knowledge. And what I'm now adding at the top of this is a whole new category that I call expert systems. And expert systems are able to use the knowledge that we've given it from our knowledge base. It's able to produce and use information in the form of, because AI can now see diagrams, it can now see and understand pictures, and it can produce diagrams and pictures and even videos. But it's also, of course, able to use our formulas when we tell it, listen, when you want to calculate the volume of a water tank, here's the formula to use. And of course, it's able to access our data tables. And so what I am doing is building expert systems. We just happen to call them agents, but they encapsulate the expertise. And the reason I make such a big thing of this is who out there in the land of business has access to all of these skills, right? And it's business managers who have experience of using spreadsheets. They know how to do formulas. They're producing charts and sheets and documents all the time. They're the ones who are the custodians of the knowledge base. So they're the ones who can actually go in and produce these expert systems. Not IT experts, not programming experts, not even AI engineers, but ordinary, everyday business managers. And so these are the targets that I'm aiming at. These are the people who think AI is going to take their jobs away. And I'm saying, no, 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 no. I have a technique that takes you from down here and puts you in the driving seat. Because the other thing that's needed with AI to make it work is what I call leadership and direction. The smartest AI systems they've developed, and they've developed some very, very smart ones that will spend 2 or 3 hours working on developing a strategy and doing the research and all of that. They all sit there doing nothing until somebody gives them direction and leadership. I've spent a lot of time doing vibe coding lately because it's the big thing. But my goodness, if you don't tell it what to do, and if you don't spot its bugs and its misinterpretations and its misunderstandings, it'll quite happily produce something, but it won't be right the first time. So direction, leadership, and who are the people in the world who have that? My clients, business managers who know standard operating procedures, who know all of the documents and all of the techniques and the formulas and the knowledge. All they need is somebody to show them how to pull that together to make expert systems. And I'm saying, ta-da, this messy diagram with the squiggly arrows all over the place, that's how you do it. And believe it or not, most of you already have the skills to make it happen. I rest my case, Your Honor.
If I can say something.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Of course, this is a perfect deal, and you overcome one big problem which I am facing for the moment, and that is that businesses don't want to share the secret sauce. So if you want to lift up all the processes, all the policies, all the things together, I face a lot of resistance. But as the question comes from the manager, the one which knows all the things, and it's only a question of learning them how to get the things together,
Yep.
to my opinion, it's a big win to open the door.
Absolutely.
The second thing which I should like to use, and that is because I'm using a different tool next to it, and that's Nocode, which is working with clean Markdown. And Markdown language is for AI very good to understand because it's well structured and also for a human being easy readable, easy editable, and for AI very easy to follow.
Yes.
Yeah, so that are the two things. And of course, with the surfing, like I wrote in the chat, the Californian dream. And I think that's also quite good because the Silicon Valley is to California. The California dream is that we are surfing on the waves.
Yeah. I mean, some of my metaphors end up being very twisted. So anyway, but yes, I mean, I'm talking to people who are deeply embedded inside the businesses, and their worry about sharing the secret knowledge is that they're the people who have the secret knowledge, and they don't want that position in the company to be taken away by these spotty faced teenagers who are doing all this AI stuff. And when I take them through this, they go, oh, okay. So, I can do this. However, there is another thing they have a concern for, and you mentioned one of them, and that is standards. My clients are in regulated industries, and so you have to be able to show that you are complying with all the different standards. And these agents help to do that because they leave an audit trail, which is very important. But the other thing that people worry about is what happens with our information that's going out to these AI systems. And that is a problem. And it's one area where Coda needs to get its act together and start to improve its compliance with the standards we have in Europe for not shipping data outside of our boundaries and so on. However, I have to say that I'm very encouraged with how recent developments with open source AIs will allow us to have AI engines running inside our own companies. And eventually we'll get to the point where these AI engines will actually run inside your browser. DeepSeek and a few other companies like that are showing how you don't need, a trillion parameter model to do some of this stuff. You only need very small models, and you can still get some of these instructions to be executed. But that's all in the future. In the meantime, I think I certainly encourage all my clients, managers to hug an AI every day. Sit down in front of a chatbot every day and ask it questions. Nothing to do with business. Just say, oh, I was looking at television the other night and it said that meteors are coming from Mars and landing in the Antarctic, and then they're finding that. How the hell does that work? Get used to dealing with these AIs on a day-to-day basis because they speak a slightly different language. They have a slightly different culture. It's a bit like being told you're going to go to Japan to do business. Well, you need to spend some time getting to understand how the Japanese culture works and how Japanese people say things and so on. So you don't misunderstand when they say things politely that they're really saying no, but you're just not aware of the culture and so on. AI is a bit like that. So I encourage people to do a daily session with AI and then to start building these agents up nice and simple. So I'm going to leave it now till next week to start adding in the knowledge base that I was talking about there to show examples of how that knowledge base gets involved. Because what you quickly learn is that you can't take the standard documents that you have knocking about in your business and simply throw them at it and expect AI not to get confused. You are going to have to curate the knowledge to make it nice and easy. One of the problems I've had with people using sales and marketing material that describes their products is that it describes the product in a very non-technical and somewhat salesy way and isn't necessarily what you need to ground your processes. Also, next week, I'm going to talk about precision AI, how you eliminate hallucinations and other errors. There are other errors, which is where it gets lost. I call it losing the plot, where the AI is supposed to be doing if this, then that, else the other, and it just says, to hell with this, I'll do the else part, and doesn't, And there are ways of both preventing that and detecting it, and I'm going to leave that till next week. So just before I wrap it up there, thank you all for coming along. I'm going to give you an opportunity if there's any further questions, and if not, then I'll bid you all adieu.
The knowledge bases are like Quadrant and the vector databases, or are they just within the system itself?
So in the large AI world, knowledge bases are actually vector databases, which are held external, so Pinecone and things like that. Or if you're using Gemini or GPT, they have their own version of this. And that requires you to export your data, have it chunked, broken up into pieces, turned into vectors, which are very similar to the tokens that AI use, and stored in a database. And that's fine if you have several gigabytes of knowledge that is somehow needed by each of your agents. I find it hard now that I've been down this road to think of an agent that isn't actually designing a nuclear warhead or a Boeing 777 replacement avionics system that would need access to gigabytes of knowledge. And so for us, in our little tiny world of no code procedures, simply taking the text in the form of a formatted document, Markdown is something that the AI understands, and simply choosing the right piece of it to put into the prompt, which you can now do because you've broken up your agent into little steps, and each step you know what it's doing. So as you saw there in one step, I know I'm looking at a Spanish document and I know it's for a certain type of insurance. So I can look up the right page of my documentation and hand that over with the prompt. And so that makes it a lot easier. So my chunking is done on the fly. Now it's considered inefficient because I'm sending over a quarter of a megabyte of data in my prompt. But it means that if the document was changed 5 seconds ago by somebody else, I'll have the latest version. It also means that if I want to build a learning agent that when it's finished processing says, I need to update our knowledge base, it can actually write the new cases and the new information back into your knowledge base. Can't do that with Pinecone very easily. And you can't even do it with the new Superhuman AI. Superhuman is using sync tables to hold the knowledge base, so you don't have to go to an external Pinecone or some other vectorized database. It's doing its own vectoring and chunking and all of that behind the scenes, but it does the chunking and the vectoring in batches on an infrequent basis. So you need to do the updating yourself inside your pack, which of course is done using TypeScript, which is a version of JavaScript. So you're into doing programming. And just before I let you go, I'm going to give you why I don't like people having to learn a programming language. Because I've had people say to me, JavaScript is very easy. My God, if you know how to do Coda actions, or if you know how to do scripting in all these other languages, you'll have no problem with Python. The problem is Python is not a formula system. In a formula system, each formula can only have one result, and it can only change the cell that it's sitting in. It can't have any side effects or go changing things elsewhere. That means that the system is able to work out, if somebody changes this piece of data over here, I know which formulas are depending on that. I can recalculate them in exactly the right sequence, and within a fraction of a second, your entire model is back to being consistent. You don't get that with Python. The programmer has to figure out, something changed. I need to recalculate this. I need to update that. Right? And if you're using databases, it says, I need to generate some SQL to change this database and so on. And that's where the bugs come in. Even professional developers produce more bugs than someone who's a whiz kid at spreadsheets and no code. And the reason is because everything's done with formulas. The exception being, of course, when you take these automated actions, we limit those to simple things. It either adds a row, or it changes a single column, or it does something simple and straightforward, and really can't go far wrong. And so this is why I am fighting tooth and nail to keep as much of this inside the no-code arena. Not just because it makes it accessible to 99% of the population instead of the 1% who know how to program, but because those 99% are safe. because they will build systems that remain consistent, reliable, easy to maintain and modify. I'm going to make a prediction for you here now, guys. We're all hearing about vibe coding. I think there's going to be vibe no coding, because vibe coding produces a gazillion tokens of source code, which may or may not contain all kinds of bugs and errors. And it hands it over to you. And if you don't know the code, and if you're not a really, really good developer, you can't do much with what it gives you. The next time you want to make a change, you have to hand it all back to the AI and hope it doesn't hallucinate or produce a security loophole. Now, imagine a vibe no coding system built on top of Airtable. Oh, hang on a second, they've done that. Built on top of Notion. Yeah, they've done that. You describe to the system what you want, and it builds a no-code solution. Much simpler, far less tokens being flung around the place, much fewer opportunities for hallucinations. And guess what? I can understand what it built. I can change it. I can modify it. I can live with it. Now, Coda hasn't done that yet, and they're off doing all this intergalactic stuff with, first of all, Coda Brain, and now with the Superhuman. So what I do, by the way, is I go to Notion and I describe to Notion what it is I want to build, and it will go away and build a Notion version, which I can then import into Coda using the Coda importation trick. And then I can add all the bells and whistles and the extra cog wheels and electric motors that my techno Lego can do, right? But so I'm staking my claim to having invented the term vibe no coding before it became the big thing in 2026. I think it's going to be. You heard it here first. And with that, folks, I'm going to leave you and go away and have my dinner. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to put this up on School as a recording, and if you could put some comments underneath it, it apparently helps the algorithm. And I'll probably stick it on YouTube as well, because I'm not trying to make any money out of this. I want to get it out to as many people as I can. So, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Max. Have a nice evening.
All the best.
Thank
Bye
you
for
very
now.
much.
And we'll do the same again.
Thank you.
Happy Christmas to everybody, by the way. I just realized Christmas is between now
Oh,
and
yeah.
our next workshop. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, or Happy Holidays, or whatever it is. Yeah, whatever you're doing. Don't be good, just be careful.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.